So if you have a vehicle and you think you have a bad PCV valve, I thought I'd go over the symptoms of a bad PCV valve and how you go about telling if it has failed. And I'm going to put links down below for everything I'm looking at here. But first of all, what is an engine PCV valve? Well, the PCV valve is short for positive crankcase ventilation, and it basically relieves the pressure that could build up inside the crankcase. And this buildup of pressure inside the crankcase is caused by blow-by gases that seep past the engine rings, and they'll build up inside the crankcase, and if these gases aren't released, then they could contaminate the oil, they could build up and blow out gaskets, and things like this. Inside of very old engines, like prior to 1964, they used what was called the draft tube, and this basically just relieved all the pressure by venting it straight into the atmosphere. And the venting into the atmosphere like this caused a lot of pollutants and a lot of smog because it was just being dumped into the outside air. And so since this system was causing so much smog and pollutants inside the air, they came up with this PCV valve that basically feeds all these blow-by gases back into the engine to get burnt off. And it's fairly simple the way it works. It's just a small little unit that has a metering device inside of it. And this small little spring inside of here helps control how much blow-by gases can go into the intake. Because when the engine's idling, it's basically almost closed. But when the RPMs go up, when they get higher, the vacuum will pull on the metering device and this spring will compress and more gases can flow into the intake, and it will be able to burn off all those blow-by gases. And so basically the PCV valve releases all the pressure that builds up inside the crankcase caused by these blow-by gases and feeds them back into the engine to get burnt off. And so what are some symptoms of a bad PCV valve? Well, it's going to depend on whether or not it's stuck closed or it's stuck open, since there'll be different symptoms. And when the PCV valve is stuck closed, sometimes you can hear like a whistling or hissing sound, and this is because it might be partially stuck closed. And as the air is going through it, it's not open as much as it should. And so you might hear a whistling or hissing sound. The engine oil is going to become dirty. Since all those blow-by gases are going to mix with the oil, they can become very sludgy and dirty. There can also be oil seepage, and the seals in the gaskets might start to fail. And this is because the pressure is building up inside of the crankcase and it's pushing out against the seals. And this includes things like the rear main seal or the valve cover gaskets and things like this. And so if you have any of these issues, then the PCV valve might be stuck closed. And so it can also get stuck open. This is very common. And when the PCV valve becomes stuck open, you could get something like a rough idle. The engine might misfire. You could get black smoke out the exhaust. The spark plugs might start fouling out, and it can also cause a vacuum leak. And the reason you get a rough idle or misfire or black smoke coming out the exhaust is because that small little spring metering device inside of the valve, it regulates how much of those blow-by gases are going back into the intake. And when the engine's idling, that PCV valve is basically stuck shut. It really only starts to open up as the engine RPM starts to increase. But if that valve is stuck open and the engine's trying to idle, there's going to be extra gases going into the cylinders, and this can throw off the air-fuel-gas ratio mixture. And so this could cause the engine to run like rich or something like that, and that'll cause problems for how the engine's running. So you'll get like a rough idle, a misfire. If there's a lot of extra gas going in the cylinders, you might be burning extra fuel, and you might get like a black exhaust smoke. If there's a lot of extra blow-by gases going in there, it could even start to foul out the spark plugs. And on some vehicles, this is going to also cause a vacuum leak. Since that PCV valve is supposed to be almost closed when the engine's idling, if it's fully open, it could cause a vacuum leak. And so how do you go about testing to see if the PCV valve has failed? Well, there's a few methods. One method is that you disconnect it from the valve cover, and then you start up the engine, and while the engine's idling, you shouldn't really feel no vacuum at the PCV valve. If you do feel a vacuum when the engine's idling, then it's stuck open. And then you increase the engine RPMs, and at that point, that metering device should start to open, and you should start to feel a vacuum at the PVC valve. Many mechanics will just feel it with their finger, but you can get a vacuum gauge and test the vacuum to see what it is. And so that's a very common method. Another method is that you remove the valve and you shake it, because when you shake it, you should hear like a little tapping noise, because that little metering device inside of it is shaking around inside of there. If you don't hear that metering device shaking around, then very likely it's stuck. So that's a very common method to test it. And another thing you can look for is you can check the engine oil and see if it's become really extremely dirty. And this is especially true if you just recently changed the oil and it should be clean. So if you just had the oil change, it's only been a few hundred miles, and you go to check it and it's really dirty, then that can't be a symptom of a bad PCV valve. And so that's basically it. I just wanted to give an overview of the symptoms of a bad PCV valve and how you go about telling if it has failed. If you have anything to add, please comment down below. If you have any questions, ask me and I'll try to answer them. If this video helps you, please click like, please click subscribe, and have a good day.